The recession is the restoration to health. The bad thing was the boom. The boom period in our example is when this guy's building an unbuildable house. Yeah, that seems great because, again, people are employed, the employment statistics are great, production looks great. But if you're on an unsustainable trajectory, that's bad. There's no way you can describe that as a good thing. The recession is when the economy catches up to all this trickery. Again, there's no shortcut to prosperity. You can't trick the economy into prosperity. Eventually it catches up and says, wait a minute, hold on. All right, we've made a whole lot of mistakes. We got capital in all kinds of crazy combinations where it doesn't belong. We got to liquidate this. We got to restart the whole thing over. That's the restoration to health. When the master builder says, I shouldn't have been doing this. This was a mistake. I'm squandering society's scarce resources. That's the restoration to health. Now, it's worth noting that we've just lived through a classic example of what happens when you try to gin up the economy through stimulus. We lived through the dot-com bust. You remember that one, the old dot-com bust? How that one ever got started, that dot-com boom, is an interesting question. But by the end of it, 1999, 2000, going into 2001, Alan Greenspan decided that, he's sick and tired of being in an economic downturn. It's time to laugh again. So in 2001, we got 11 rate cuts, because when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So he's got the interest rate hammer. So why don't we just lower interest rates, right? There's no problem that can't solve. Well, notice what happened in 2001. There we had the only recession on record in which housing starts did not decline. So people drew the erroneous conclusion, thanks to Greenspan, that housing apparently is robust under all circumstances, even in economic downturns. House prices can never fall. A house is the best investment you can make. Flipping a house is a good way to make a living. These things really take on a lot of steam right around that time. People start calling Greenspan the maestro. They can't believe he's given us such a soft landing at the end of this recession. It was such a mild recession. Yeah, what did he do? He liquored up the master builder, so that the economy then persists on this unsustainable trajectory for all the more years, so that when the bust inevitably comes, and the bust is inevitable, because as in the case of the master builder is building an unbuildable house, that bust is coming. You cannot hold that off through trickery. When the bust comes, it's all the worse, because analogically speaking, the master builder has been on that unsustainable trajectory all those additional years. So now the capital waste and squandering is all the worse. So yeah, thanks a lot, Alan. You gave us a soft landing in 2001. Now we get the bust now. And Greenspan, to add insult to injury, goes on television and says, I guess there's just some flaw in the free market that I didn't notice before. Well, you know what, Alan? We have found the flaw, and it is you. Now, the master builder example is also a good analogy for what happened with consumers. I've used it as an analogy for producers, producing the wrong types of things. But also consumers were misled by the housing bubble into thinking they were wealthier than they were. And so they made consumption decisions that were unsustainable in the long run. They bought things they shouldn't have bought. They took out money from their houses they shouldn't have done. They bought exotic vacations, fancy cars and houses, and now they are discovering that they've been on an unsustainable trajectory. So now the economy has got to restructure. The economy was building up whole sectors in response to this bubble. So that is to say, if you look at, for example, Cold Stone Creamery, where you can go to get ice cream and pay $8 for an ice cream cone, that's a bubble field right there. When people feel like, hey, I got a $500,000 house, what's an $8 ice cream cone? Yeah, but you know what? Cold Stone Creamery is in big trouble right now because people are realizing maybe I don't want an $8 ice cream cone. Maybe I want to buy my ice cream from the grocery store when it's on sale and eat it at home. So suddenly, it turns out it's not that there's too much production and too little consumption. It's that the stuff being produced is in a mismatch with what consumers want to demand right now. They don't want $8 ice cream cones. They don't want $6 cups of coffee. These are little mini bubbles that have popped up alongside the gigantic bubble. So the whole economy has been discombobulated by this bubble. Now, where does the housing bubble come from? No, it's not because people in China decided they were going to save more. This is such an inane explanation. For one thing, global savings rates were not at particularly historic highs. And in fact, global savings rates continued to be high even through the housing bust. So there's no real causal explanation there. Whereas if you look at what the Fed was doing, lowering rates, there's a much, much closer correlation to what's going on. People have talked a lot about lending standards declining under pressure from federal agencies. Well, it's not just federal agencies. It's Given the structure and the incentives that exist in the banking system today, the banks want to be lent out to the extent possible. Now, right now, of course, we're in an unusual case, but during the bubble, that's what they wanted. Now, if the Fed floods the economy with money, the banks suddenly have a lot more to lend. Well, where are they going to find additional people to lend the money to? Because at any given time, they're already lent up. So where are they going to get these additional people? Well, naturally, they're either going to have to lower interest rates to attract them, or they're going to have to lower their lending standards. There's no other alternative. It's like if I'm coach of a basketball team, and I pick my players, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, by the way, you can pick 2 more. Where am I going to get those 2 more? From the pool of people I previously passed over. So naturally, there's going to be a downward trend in lending standards. Now, even Anna Schwartz, who is not an Austrian, she's a Chicago school economist. I think she's in her 90s now. She wrote a lot with Milton Friedman. Even she says that you can't get a bubble like this without inflationary monetary policy from the monetary authority. Because if you've got an asset like housing that's just appreciating and appreciating and appreciating, well, you're going to need more and more and more money to get in that market. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come only from there being this sort of independent source of money creation. So in other words, suppose there was let's say some kind of psychological attachment to house buying, and let's suppose we had no Federal Reserve. People just start buying a lot of houses. Well, what would have happened is the banks would have run low on money to lend, interest rates would have shot up, and that would have put an end to it. That would have put an end to speculation in real estate. But if you are the Soviet commissar in charge of money and interest rates, well, you can increase the money supply according to your central plan, and the banks suddenly feel like, hey, we have an awful lot to lend, and we can keep this illusion going. Now, there will be those who say, hey, we've had economic downturns before there was a Federal Reserve, so how can you blame everything on them? Well, I don't, but in my book Meltdown, because I don't have time to talk about it here, I actually go through and look at all those financial panics. And they're all basically caused by the same essential factors. There is this creation of credit, artificial creation of credit that doesn't correspond to real savings, and it leads to misallocations of resources that have to be liquidated amidst a bust. And so we've now happened upon the source of the cluster of entrepreneurial error. It's the interference with the structure of interest rates, which pervades the economy. You cannot expect to interfere with such an essential bellwether and for there not to be massive errors committed by businessmen, entrepreneurs, consumers, and so on. Now, let's see, how much more time have I got?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, good. That's just enough time. Now I want to say a little something about fiscal stimulus policies. Because people say, well, in the stimulus package, we just haven't given it enough time yet. I think we've given it too much time. I think the stimulus package should never have been passed. I think it should be repealed forthwith, and I'm going to justify that statement. First of all, let's look at what's the problem with the economy after one of these busts. The problem is imbalances in the economy. You got too much of one thing, too little of another. Too much housing. By some estimates, there's a 1 million house overhang on the market right now. So you got too much of one thing, too little of something else. And the something else is whatever those resources would have gone to if they hadn't been artificially directed by the Fed and by government into home building. So you've got imbalances. And typically you've got too much higher order stage production and too little lower order stage production. Whatever it is, it's imbalances caused by these interest rate signals sending the wrong signal, not telling the truth. And so you've got misallocations of resources. Now, simply to say the government should just spend a lot of money, well, that's viewing the question at far too high a level of aggregation, that all we need is just spending per se. No. The problem is much more subtle than that.